Welcome to Hebraic Insights in the Gospels. Join us every Sabbath on Zion Road Radio for a look at the life, deeds, and words of Yeshua Messiah and his followers from the Torah-centric Hebraic perspective they were originally lived and written in.
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it. And you find rest for your souls. You find rest for your souls. Oh, you find rest for your souls when you walk in his way.
Today's program is about Mark chapter 11, verse 1 through verse 26. Why did Messiah look around at everything when he entered into the temple in Jerusalem? And what's up with the fig tree? Why was Messiah driving people out of the temple? Are the other accounts of him driving people out of the temple contradicting this account? What did Messiah find when he inspected the nation of Israel? Can we expect a similar inspection today? Does what we do now matter in that inspection? And if so, why? Stay tuned through to the end of today's program for Eliyahu ben David's answer to these questions and more in Mark chapter 11, verse 1 through verse 26. And now, here's today's scripture portion. Mark chapter 11, verse 1 through verse 26. When they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go your way into the village that is opposite you. Immediately as you enter into it, you will find a young donkey tied, on which no one has sat. Untie him and bring him. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'Adonai needs him,' and immediately he will send him back here." They went away and found a young donkey tied at the door outside in the open street, and they untied him. Some of those who stood there asked them, "What are you doing untying the young donkey?" They said to them just as Yeshua had said, and they let them go. They brought the young donkey to Yeshua and threw their garments on it, and Yeshua sat on it. Many spread their garments on the way, and others were cutting down branches from the trees and spreading them on the road. Those who went in front and those who followed cried out, "Hoshiana! Blessed is he who comes in the name of Adonai! Blessed is the kingdom of our father David that is coming in the name of Adonai! Hoshiana in the highest!" Yeshua entered into the temple in Jerusalem. When he had looked around at everything, it being now evening, he went out to Bethany with the 12. The next day, when they had come out from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree afar off having leaves, he came to see if perhaps he might find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. Yeshua told it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. They came to Jerusalem, and Yeshua entered into the temple, and began to throw out those who sold and those who bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold the doves. He would not allow anyone to carry a container through the temple. He taught, saying to them, "Isn't it written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." The chief priests and the scribes heard it and sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the multitude was astonished at his teaching. When evening came, he went out of the city. As they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away from the roots. Peter, remembering, said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered away." Yeshua answered them, "Have faith in Elohim. For most certainly, I tell you, whoever may tell this mountain, 'Be taken up and cast into the sea,' and doesn't doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says is happening, he shall have whatever he says. Therefore I tell you, all things, whatever you pray and ask for, believe that you have received them, and you shall have them. Whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father, who is in heaven, may also forgive you your transgressions. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your transgressions." And now here's Eliyahu ben David with insight on that portion.
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it. And you find rest for your souls. You find rest for your souls. Oh, you find rest for your souls when you walk in his way.
Greetings, friends. It's great to have you with us once again. And I think you're going to find tonight's meeting very interesting as we start closing in now on the closing chapters of the book of Mark and are really getting into very exciting events in the life of Yeshua Messiah. Our theme tonight is Inspected by the King. This is on Mark 11, 1 through 26. And I'm not going to go through everything, but a few points that I was impressed with. One thing that I noticed is that as soon as Yeshua had come as the king, as prophesied in Scripture, was accepted and proclaimed as the king by the people, it says Yeshua entered into the temple in Jerusalem and he looked around at everything. And I thought that was interesting. I think that's the kind of phrase it's easy just to pass over. Why was he looking around at everything? You know, he had been to Jerusalem before. As a matter of fact, he went up there every year. Even when he was 12 years old, he went up to Jerusalem. He went up with his family. He was very familiar with the temple and what went on there. So it wasn't because this was all new to him, because it wasn't new to him, what he was seeing. He was looking around at everything. I'm thinking this was a lot like what happens when we have a new president here in the United States or a new ruler anywhere. What do when they are inaugurated? Isn't the first thing they're going to do is look around and see the condition of everything, how it all works, what's going on with it? Aren't you going to inspect the state of the rulership, the administration of the country? So I believe this is what Yeshua was doing when he entered into the temple immediately after being declared king. He was looking, what is going on here right now? What is happening here? What is appropriate towards these people who are running things here? Well, it tells us the next day when they'd come out from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree afar off having leaves, he came to see if perhaps he might find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. Yeshua told it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. Now, this story about the figs, it's one of the things in the Bible that really puzzles people. Because why is this story here? It doesn't seem like there's continuity with the whole rest of what's going on. And a lot of people do read the Bible like this. They're reading through the Bible, and all of a sudden they come to something that just doesn't really make sense to them. This is one of those things for a lot of folks. And people have lots of questions about this with the fig tree. Now, we've talked about this before in the book of Matthew, so we're not going to go into this totally, but one of the things that kind of gets people with this is it even says it's not the season for figs. And yet, Yeshua cursed the fig tree. That doesn't really seem fair, does it, to the fig tree? It's not even the season for figs. So what is all this about with the fig tree? Jeremiah 23, 11 through 12. It says, "For both prophet and priest are profane. Yes, in my house have I found their wickedness, says Yahweh. Therefore their way shall be to them as slippery places in the darkness. They shall be driven on and fall therein. For I will bring evil on them, even the year of their visitation, says Yahweh." This is actually very much like the story that we're reading in Mark 11, because here we have the visitation of the king, the inspection of the king. Of what? Yahweh's house. And what is he finding? Wickedness. The prophet and priest are profane. This is what he found when he inspected. And then we have the story of the fig tree. Could these things be connected? Well, here's a commentary that talks about the fig tree. This is the Believer's Bible commentary. This is an evangelical Christian commentary. It says, "Fig trees in Bible lands produced an early edible fruit before the leaves appeared. It was a harbinger of the regular crop, here described as the season for figs. If no early figs appeared, it was a sign that there would be no regular crop later on. When Jesus came to the nation of Israel, there were leaves which speak of profession, but there was no fruit for God. There was promise without fulfillment, profession without reality. Jesus was hungry for fruit from the nation. Because there was no early fruit, he knew that there would be no later fruit from the unbelieving people. And so he cursed the fig tree. This pre-pictured the judgment which was to fall on Israel in AD 70. Well, this strikes me as being somewhat true, but then taking a twist. What it's telling us about the figs is absolutely true. There are early figs that come before the regular season for the figs. And the early figs kind of tell you that there's going to be a bigger crop coming. And so even though it wasn't the season for figs, there should have been those early figs there that tell you that the fig tree produces something. So we'll get into that a little more in a minute. But that part is all true about fig trees in Israel. But then it goes into this and applies this to the nation of Israel. And it says that when Jesus came to the nation of Israel, there were leaves which speak of profession, but there was no fruit for God. Is that what Messiah actually found? Is this what we've seen as we've gone through the Gospels? Yeshua was out there sowing the word, right? And did he find any fruit? Well, he did find fruit, didn't he? He had disciples who were following him. And were they not producing fruit for the kingdom? He had the 12, he had the 70, and realized that the 12 and the 70 were picked out of even a larger group of disciples that followed him. So when this Christian commentary says there was no fruit for God, is it telling you the truth? It's not. Anybody can read the Gospels. They can see that for themselves. So what they've done here is they've oversimplified this picture, haven't they? What they're trying to tell you here is that Jesus inspected the nation and found that the nation was really without any true fruit from God, and so he cursed the nation. But that really doesn't fit the picture, because there were those who had fruit for God there in Israel. Why do Christian commentaries invariably say this? It's because they have a conception of reality that does not coincide with true history. They want to present themselves as the original group of believers. And the idea is that the nation of Israel was entirely without merit. So the nation of Israel was set aside by Jesus, and they were chosen instead. And yet, that does not fit the picture we have of actual history and of the scriptures. On Pentecost, who were those 3,000 people that came forward? Were they Jews or were they Gentiles? If you read the verses, you'll find out they were all Jews, as were the majority of the believers up until the destruction of the temple. Most of them were Jewish and Israelite believers. So you can't really say there was no fruit for God in the nation, and their story simply doesn't wash. And this is why we have teaching on history that proves the church as a separate group is actually a schism from this original group that broke off after 135 AD. And they continue to think that they are the replacement for Israel. But their theology does not match up with the scriptures or history. So they're going to end up very disappointed someday when the church doesn't turn out to be for them what they say it is. Well, we want to understand the real truth. Now, that might shake some people, to hear that about the church, the Gentile church. But don't we want to know what the truth is? Isn't that how we're going to understand how things really are? Of my teaching on the King has come, when we went through Matthew 21, 1 through 22, pointed out Jeremiah 24, and the fig tree story really refers back to this prophetic statement from the book of Jeremiah, where he showed Jeremiah 2 baskets of figs. And it says one basket had very good figs, like the figs that are first ripe. And I think that's very important, the figs that are first ripe. That's these figs that are the early figs, before the time for figs. They're the best figs, those early figs. And so that's one basket of figs. And then there's another basket of really bad figs. And Yeshua knew what this was all about. As a matter of fact, Jeremiah goes on and says these bad figs, the disobedient figs, are so bad, I will even give them up to be tossed back and forth among all the kingdoms of the earth for evil, to be a reproach and a proverb, a taunt and a curse in all places where I shall drive them. I will send the sword, the famine, the pestilence, and so on until they be consumed from off the land. Well, was it all the nation that this is referring to? Isn't it being very specific here to tell us there are good figs and bad figs, and this is what was going to happen to the bad figs? So you see, the picture is more complicated than the way it's normally presented in Christian circles and Christian commentaries. What happened with the fig tree was not commenting about the people who were good figs. It wasn't commenting about the remnant. It was commenting about the bad figs. Micah 7, 1 through 4 also follows this theme about the figs. It says, misery is mine. Indeed, I am like one who gathers the summer fruits as gleanings of the vineyard. There is no cluster of grapes to eat. My soul desires to eat the early fig. Who do you suppose this is talking about? This is prophetic of the coming of Yeshua Messiah and his inspection of what? The temple. Specifically inspecting the temple. And that means all the leadership connected with the temple, which was the elite leadership of the nation. And what is he looking for in that inspection? His soul desires to eat the early fig. He's got a hunger for seeing some righteousness, something good there at the temple, in the administration of the temple. And as we go on, it says, the ruler and judge ask for a bribe, and the powerful man dictates the evil desire of his soul. Thus they conspire together. And then it finishes saying, the day of your watchman, even your visitation, has come. Now is the time of their confusion. So here's talking about a visitation. It's really prophetic language explaining the very chapter we're looking at in the book of Mark and the things that happened there. It's equating the fig tree incident with the time of the visitation of these rulers and judges, these leaders at the temple. So what we see here is the story about the fig tree relates directly to Messiah's inspection of the temple and of the leadership there at the temple, and the time of their visitation had come. In Luke chapter 19, it even uses this same word, visitation. And this is parallel verses to what we're reading in Mark. It says, when he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it. Doesn't tell you that in Mark. This is what happened after he was received as the king. He saw the city and then he wept over it. This is what happened when he went to look at everything. He wept over it, saying, if you, even you, had known today the things which belong to your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come on you when your enemies will throw up a barricade against you, surround you, hem you in on every side, and will dash you and your children within you to the ground. They will not leave in you one stone on another, because you didn't know the time of your visitation. That's what was going on. The king had come. He was inspecting the temple leadership, and they did not know the time of their inspection. They were so self-confident in their sense of control over everything, as if nobody could ever change it, that they didn't even see that this visitation had come upon them. Here from Thayer's dictionary, it tells us about this word translated visitation. And it says it means investigation, inspection, visitation. This is not like a visit from a friend, is it? This is like being a restaurant and having a visit from the food inspector, right? This is an official visit. This is like having a visit from an auditor from the IRS. Somebody looking into what you've been doing who can make a judgment on you. And it even says this, that act by which God looks into and searches out the ways, deeds, character of men in order to adjust them, their lot accordingly, whether joyous or sad. That was the visitation of Yeshua Messiah upon that temple. There would be consequences to that visitation, and yet they were oblivious to its meaning. Here are the verses. They came to Jerusalem, and Yeshua entered into the temple and began to throw out those who sold and those who bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold the doves. He would not allow anyone to carry a container through the temple. He taught, saying to them, isn't it written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. And notice who responded. The chief priests and the scribes heard it and sought how they might destroy him. They knew who he was talking about. You know, it's so interesting, some of the things you hear from people, some of the things you read, that people think when they read the scriptures. Some people think that Yeshua was somehow mentally unbalanced, and he lost his temper and threw out all these people out of the temple. He was the king. He had authority. This was his father's house. What is the first thing the king should do on receiving his office? Is it not cleaning out his father's house? It was absolutely appropriate for him to do what he did, because what were they doing? They were turning Yahweh's house of prayer into a den of robbers. Now, another charge people make about this is they point to John chapter 2 And here too, it talks about Yeshua driving these people, the money changers and so forth, out of the temple. Only here in John, it's early in Yeshua's ministry. It's right after his first miracle. And it occurs around the Passover time of his first year of ministry. Whereas in Mark, if you follow that along, it's very clear that happens in the last year of his ministry, near Passover, just before he's put to death. So people say, well, which was it? Was it at the beginning or at the end? And the answer is so very simple. It didn't just happen once. It happened from the first time after he entered into his ministry. The first time he went to Jerusalem, he went in and he cleaned out the temple. Now, it doesn't tell us what happened the next time. There's 3 years in all. But then it does tell us at the end what he did. Personally, I think he did it every time. I think he probably did it the second time too. Why wouldn't he? He's perfectly consistent. He didn't like what they were doing. He had authority to tell them not to do it. So why would he do anything else? It's perfectly consistent. There's nothing inconsistent here, and yet people look at this and say, well, this doesn't agree. Well, there's other things that are different here besides the time difference. For instance, in the account in John, he actually makes a whip that he uses to drive the people out. You don't read anything about that in Mark. He didn't make a whip in Mark. That's why. It's a different occasion. In Mark, at the end, he's telling them they've turned the temple into a den of robbers. Here, he simply says, they're making his father's house a marketplace. So you see, by the time he gets to the end of his ministry, he's really ratcheted up what he's saying, hasn't he? That's probably because they didn't respond to the earlier times. And now it's that time for him to make that final judgment about them. And so his judgment is much more forceful and strong at the end. So what are we to think about all of this? Well, I think one thing we should think about is the authority of the Son of God. We could easily make the same mistake that those religious leaders made. We could easily overlook the fact that our ways are inspected, that we are being observed, visited, if you will. As a matter of fact, all the evidence is there that we are in the final generation. And by definition, that is a time of judgment when the world is under the scrutiny of Messiah. I look and watch the news and I see really amazing things. I'm seeing so much, all of the dirt and the evil and the hidden things of the elite rulers of this world all coming up to the surface. I don't think that's just a mistake, that that's being aired out before the whole world, that we're all seeing this. I believe these things are happening because, once again, we are seeing an inspection by the King. And this will be followed in due course, as it was in the first century, with judgment upon the evildoers. So these are times, I think, when we need to be aware and realize there is a visitation of the king going on. A couple of verses that I like. Proverbs 5:21 through 23. For the ways of man are before the eyes of Yahweh. He examines all his paths. The evil deeds of the wicked ensnare him. The cords of his sin hold him firmly. He will die for lack of instruction. In the greatness of his folly, he will go astray. We are seeing this happening today. And where is the judgment from the world on all of these evil people? We constantly see all of the dirt and all the evil things they've done being brought to light. But when are we going to see even the first one of them actually have to pay for the things they've done? It seems that the world has a different standard for those people. But Yahweh does not, and he is watching what is going to happen, and they're going to have to stand before him in his court. 2 Corinthians 5, 9, and 10 talk about the same idea of being inspected by the king. It says, therefore also we make it our aim, whether at home or absent, to be well-pleasing to him. For we must all be revealed before the judgment seat of Messiah, that each one may receive the things in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. Interestingly, it's the Apostle Paul that said this. And I think if you talk to a lot of people in the Easy Grace community, and you read them that, they wouldn't believe it was Paul that said that we're going to receive the things in the body according to what we have done, whether good or bad. They think that grace just washes all of that away. Paul didn't think so. He thought what we do as believers does matter. And it does matter insofar as our reward. How we walk as believers has an impact on what our reward will be. So, yes, we want to always be well-pleasing to him in everything we do. I think these are important things to be thinking about. And in this day where there is so little fear of God and we see so much evil done in the name of religion, it's an opportunity for us to prove that we're the good figs, the early figs, the remnant that is making a stand for Yahweh and his ways. And when he comes, may he find us like that early fruit, something pleasing to him.
Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you find rest.
You have been listening to Hebraic Insights in the Gospels. Some of the scripture references made in today's program are Mark chapter 11, verse 1 through verse 26, Jeremiah chapter 24, Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 11 through verse 12, Micah chapter 7, verse 1 through verse 4, Luke chapter 19, verse 41 through verse 44, John chapter 2, verse 11 through verse 16, Proverbs 5, verse 21 through verse 23, and 2 Corinthians 5, verse 9 through verse 10. Further teachings and study materials on Jeremiah and the other prophets, the good and bad figs of Jeremiah chapter 24, the house of David, the Davidic covenant, who determines the rightful ruler of the kingdom of Israel, Yeshua Messiah as the King of Israel, the history of Davidic leaders before, during, and after Messiah came, the 12 apostles and their role as the leaders of the 12 tribes, the function of the 70 elders in the New Testament and the Old Testament, how the body of Messiah was supposed to work together to bear good fruit, and how the authority structure that Messiah set up makes that possible, how the Christian church left that authority structure and created their own man-made authority structure, and how it's been prophesied that the original authority structure will be restored in this final generation before Messiah's return, along with many other related topics, can be found at our membership site, Zion Tabernacle. Sign up is free. Just go to zion.net. That's TSIYON.NET. New programs on the Gospels will be airing every Sabbath on Zion Road Radio. Tune in next Shabbat to learn more from Hebraic insights in the Gospels. Shabbat Shalom!
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient
House of Israel, weep for joy. I brought you out of the nations.
The restoration of the remnant of Israel is one of the most undertaught, neglected, and unknown major events in Bible prophecy. A strange fact, since prophecies and references to this event can be found all throughout almost every major book of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. Now, Yahweh has raised up Zion Ministry to teach His remnant nation of Israel everything they need to know about this often neglected truth in His perfect timing. To learn who the remnant of Israel is, what the Zion mission is, and why we teach the things we do, go to our website at zion.org and click on Remnant Vision in the menu bar. That's TSIYON.org.
I've not forsaken you. You are my own. I brought you out of the nations. Tear down your idols and throw them away. Judah and Ephraim, brothers, I say, I've not forsaken